Oh, very firm on this today. All right, I'd like to call the
workshop of the County Board of County Commissioners. Today is August 6, 2024, and it is 1:33. Today's topic is fiscal year 2025 budget, second draft. I would like to recognize County Manager Dave Plummer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At our June 18th workshop, we had the board had given us direction to add a few additional components to the budget. One was the 6% for all employees, as well as the constitutionals, which we've included into this draft budget. The other was adding positions into DOT, as well as code enforcement, as well as all the equipment associated with both of those departments. So that has been added into the budget as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Pete to present.
All right. Thanks, Dave. That's a good segue from our June 18th workshop. Again, at the end, I'll ask, are there any adjustments you would like made, and whether you want another workshop or if you just want to go right into the public hearing. And so what we're doing is taking you forward from what you saw June 18th, just in between June 1st and July 1st. I believe the June 1st general fund, the tax base increase was 9.65%. The July 1st was 12.8%, so gained some tax base there. And then this is important, the next 4 years, that was the January revenue estimating conference percentages. The revenue estimating conference had another ad valorem conference last week, and I did look at those results. They've increased, I think, 2025 to, I think it was 7.7%. And then kind of front-end loaded some of that stuff. So according to the state, it's looking a little better, and that's not the only thing we look at, but I just wanted you all to be aware of that. But I will go through this later when you see some modeling going forward. As Dave stated, so at June 18th, we had talked about some potential positions, and the board said, yes, go ahead and factor those into the models and the budget. So in the general fund, we had 12 EMS positions, combination communications, Cape Coral Station, critical care paramedics. So we've added those in, and those are general fund positions. So that adds $900,000 to the general fund. And then in unincorporated MSTU, there's 10 DOT positions, kind of spread over primarily drainage, paving, mowing, and signals, and the associated equipment for that. And then 3 code enforcement officers and 1 administrative staff that we talked about with associated equipment. It was 2 officers, but Commissioner Greenwell had brought up a code enforcement for illegal dumping, so we have added that into the budget. So going forward, you'll see all those have been incorporated into the numbers. So this is a general fund, and I'll show you a similar spreadsheet for the unincorporated MSTU, but on the right-hand side, both the revenue and expense portion, that takes you forward from June 18th. So the revenues of $673 million, June 18th, and expenses of $683. So between June 1st and July 1st, that additional percentage in the tax base generated another $13.6 million in tax revenues. We had just some cleanup items, and so you can see $687,000 of revenues. And then we've added the things I spoke about above for the general fund. So you can see the public safety positions, $900,000. On June 18th, we had a placeholder for 5% pay adjustment. The board asked what it would look like if we were to add another percent to make that 6%. So you can see what that is. At the very bottom is that's the amount it would be for BoCC positions in the general fund, and then also for a sheriff's office if they were going to add a percent also. And then prior to the June 18th workshop, the sheriff's office had asked for an adjustment for operating expenses of $5.6 million, so we've factored that in. And then also, because of the tax base increase, we are paying more to the cities for the CRA increment. So we adjusted expenses for that. So then, if you go to the left side, you can see we have $687 million of revenue, $692 of expenses. So you have a gap of about $5.7 million which was slightly better than what we showed June 18th. Current undesignated reserves of almost 98 million. As we discussed June 18th, we are going to use the emergency bridge loan we received after Hurricane Ian, and we're going to use that for pay operational expenses, primarily EMS salaries. And so we have adjusted reserves of 122 million. You take out the 5.7 million gap from that, and then also your use of the $25 million, you have an additional 19 million. So 5.7 is kind of paying for the current deficit. And then what we're recommending, and you'll see this flow through, we're recommending the balance of that 25 million, because it's added capacity into reserves, is 19.3 million. We're recommending that we hold that as a restricted reserve for a future deficit in 25-26. You'll see that flow through in the next slides. So you have adjusted reserves of 97.8 million, sheriff's capital of 10.6, and DOT equipment, and then transfer to the general. We had put a placeholder of 5 million at the June 18th workshop, but with some additional capacity, we want to pay for the DOT equipment out of this. There is a deficit in the general fund CIP running around 5 to 6 million for not next year 24-25, but 25-26. That's to pay for ambulance stations primarily. So we want to use this money for that. And then also we would recommend adding a little bit of extra into that general fund CIP, because it's very tight. It's constantly either a little bit surplus, a little bit deficit. So to build some capacity in that, so if the board has things it wants to do, we can accommodate those. So you come up with a ending reserve of 72 million. And then on the right-hand side, you basically see the exact same thing, only that, so we get to the 72 million in reserves, which is undesignated. So that's a little light compared to your policy of, running around the $80-85 million. But remember, you have that reserve for future deficit, which is restricted. So if you add those two together, that's about 91 million in undesignated and restricted reserves. And this is what the general fund looks like after all of those adjustments. I do want to say, if you look down at the lower graph, the last third graph there, below debt service, you have growth increment for infrastructure. We did fund that in 23-24 after the budget year closed through some excess reserves that are generated. I do want to point out we do not have that in the budget for 24-25, but we'll attempt to do the same thing after year-end close. So this takes you through 24-25, where you get that 72 million, and then to next year. So next year, we have a beginning reserve of 72 million. You've got that reserve designated for deficit. So that gives you a beginning reserve of 91 million. I'll show you on the next page. You have revenues projected at 6.1%. Remember, this is the January revenue estimating conference number. Revenues of 718 million. Expenses of 732 million, so you're still running a deficit, but your ending reserve ends up being about 77 million, so a little better than what it was the previous year. And so, in the interest of kind of trying to estimate what future tax base increases are going to be, obviously the state missed the mark completely this past year for Lee County because it had about a 6.6% increase, I think, for this year, and it ended up being 12.8. So what I've done here is I've taken the revenues and expenses for next year, starting at 6.1%, which you saw on the previous page, and then I've added, so far the tax base went up 1% higher than 6.1, 2%, 3%, 4%. You can see what happens to your surplus deficit and when that goes away. So at 7.1%, you have a deficit, but your ending reserves are 82 million, better than that 77 million I just showed you. 8.1%, slight deficit. We're talking about a 690 million general fund at this point, so that's a slight deficit. And then you have $86 million of reserves. If it's 9.1%, then you go into the surplus. You've taken care of your deficit and you're building reserves. 10.1%, you can see what happens there. I'll get into unincorporated MSTU later because I've done the same thing and I've replicated the slide later on. So that just allows you to look at, well, do we think the tax base is going to go from 12.8% this year down to 6.1% increase? And doesn't seem likely at this point. It's hard to predict the future, but this can give you kind of an idea of what each percentage gives you if it's higher than what that percentage is. Any questions at that point? Okay. Then this is the unincorporated MSTU, again, taking you forward from June 18th. So June 18th, and then we had an additional increase between June 1st and July 1st in tax base to 13.53%. So those are your revenues, and then the expenses we've brought forward. So the school resource officers, that program is funded out of the unincorporated MSTU for the sheriff's office. So there was an adjustment there because we had an estimate of what that would be. 1% pay increase, an additional percent pay increase, not 1%, it's 5%. And then if the sheriff is going to do an additional 1%, which they've said they want to do to 6%, then you get 63,000 you add. There's the code enforcement positions that we discussed earlier on, and the 10 DOT positions, and then a 1% pay increase for those BoCC department employees who are in the unincorporated MSTU. So you can see on the left side we have a gap, but we have healthy reserves, and after the reserves we have a 10% reserve of expenses in the unincorporated MSTU. And that's shown there, so you see what the percentage reserve is that we're forecasting at the end of 24-25, recognizing that's with a that's just what we're estimating the reserve to be. And then you can see what's driving costs in the unincorporated MSTU. The transfer to DOT is just a reflection of additional positions as well as more roadways, more roadway maintenance, more expensive materials. And so down below here, I've done the same thing. I've said, okay, so if the tax base in the unincorporated MSTU goes up by more than 6.1%, it goes 7.1, or if it goes to 8.1 or 9.1 or 10.1, you can see at what point that forecasted deficit goes away, which it goes away after 9.1%. And then the resulting reserves, which are still running in the 10% range. So I know this morning, Commissioners, you approved an item where the county is going to take over well permitting for the city of Cape Coral. Those positions aren't reflected here. However, I will incorporate those into the budget before it goes to public hearing. Those are 3 positions, two inspectors and a customer service person with associated equipment. We have some open positions, so we can get those folks on board right away. And I can tell you the adjustment for the general fund, these are general fund positions going forward, is revenues exceed expenses to run that program, so it is self-supporting. So before we come back to the public hearing in September, I will add those positions in. And then all these estimates for the pay raise, we'll actually put that into our position budgeting, so we'll get the exact number of what that's going to be, so you can see final numbers. And then, so the August 20th final budget budget workshop is there if needed. or we can go directly to September 3rd for the first public hearing and September 17th for the second. So at this point, I'm just going to ask, are there any further adjustments you would like made? I've discussed this with the sheriff's office. They are supportive of what is in here for their budget and what they plan to request in their formal letter to everybody. And we can, if the board approves, we'll add in the pay adjustment, the positions, and we can either have another workshop or we can take this directly to the public hearing.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions at this time? Okay. Mr. Turner?
So I guess the only question that we need answered is, do you want to have the additional workshop, or are you good to go ahead and move it towards the public hearing?
Commissioner Wayne?
I am fine going to final budget. I don't think we need another workshop. I think it's clear Pete's got some adjustments relative to Wells. I'm assuming in the adjustments, whatever remuneration we receive from the Cape will be included in that expense, as well as some additional dollars. So I don't think there's going to be much issues, and really it's the budget in front of us. I don't think we need another workshop, but that's my 2 cents.
I'm okay going to the budget here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Pete explained it very well. The presentation's very clear. Looks like we got a good budget in front of us, so I'm okay with skipping the workshop and going right to the public hearing.
I agree.
Yes, except for the positions, which that will come in time as we, the question was, with the new well permit, we taking it over, the revenue will exceed overall cost over time. The initial cost, we will receive revenue from the city of Cape Coral, but it won't be enough to cover the positions, but they'll be covered over time.
They'll be covered within the next year.
Yeah.
Through permitting fees.
So I think we're all in agreement that we would be able to just go ahead and move it forward. Pete, great job. We appreciate all the staff and all the hard work. Mr. Horner, is there any other business in front of us?
Yes, sir. We're good.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you.